world, a stage for millennia, had become a hunting ground. The hunters who lurked in the shadows were no figment of superstition or wild imaginings. They were biologically perfect predators, the pinnacle of adaptation to a nocturnal existence and absolute dominance. Humans called them vampires, a simple classification for an unspeakable horror. But they were far more than legends of fangs and blood. Their physiology was an evolutionary marvel. Incredible muscular strength could shatter stone with bare hands and allowed them to leap tens of feet, defying the laws of inertia and gravity known to man. Their bones, reinforced by an unknown mineral compound, withstood colossal stress. The speed of their movements surpassed the human eye's ability to track, rendering them blurs in the moment of attack. Reflexes operated at the very limits of nerve conduction. Their endurance allowed them to pursue prey over vast distances with no visible signs of fatigue. Their metabolism was astonishingly efficient, enabling them to exist for long periods without feeding. Hunger only made them more dangerous, more ferocious. Tissue regeneration was phenomenal. Ordinary gunshot wounds and multiple traumas healed in mere minutes. Only faint scars remained, and sometimes, if the damage wasn't too extensive, none at all. Bullet holes sealed before one's eyes, fractures mended with terrifying speed. Severe internal injuries were not fatal for long. Only damage to a vital structure like the brain or heart led to irreversible consequences. And even then, not always. But the primary danger lay not in their physical might, but in their influence over the mind. They didn't employ hypnosis in its mystical sense. It was a subtle psychophysical pressure seeping in through the senses, through a gaze, the intonation of a voice, imperceptible vibrations. At a neurological level, this influence triggered malfunctions. Panic would surge without apparent cause, willpower would crumble, submitting to an alien will, reality would distort. The victim would see or hear what wasn't there, or fail to see and hear the obvious, freezing in a stupor or committing suicidal acts. This wasn't magic, but a form of biological weaponry, acting directly on the brain, deliberately striking at the very foundations of human perception and volition. The history of the world before the Lycans was a chronicle of fading civilizations. Vampires left no monuments or legends of themselves as creators. They erased societies, enslaving and annihilating them, all while mimicking ordinary humans. They operated from the shadows, infiltrated structures of power, business, and religion, striking where least expected, undermining civilizations from within, and toppling them with sudden waves of violence. Humanity teetered on the brink of extinction, failing to comprehend the nature of its enemy, attributing everything to epidemics, wars, natural disasters, and the wrath of gods. Early attempts at resistance, based on superstitions, silver, garlic, holy water, proved useless, leading only to more victims. This demonstrated to the vampires humanity's helplessness and its adherence to archaic notions. Humanity didn't know how to fight what it didn't understand. It couldn't even identify the enemy, and that enemy was already poised to deliver the mortal blow. Then came the Lycans. They were not the cursed werewolves of folklore. That image was a piece of disinformation crafted by the vampires themselves. The Lycans were an ancient race, their physiology resistant to vampiric mental manipulation due to a unique brain structure and nervous system. Physically, they were comparable, and in their transformed state, they surpassed vampires in strength, speed, and endurance. Their heightened senses gave them an advantage in tracking and detection. The Lycans recognized the threat, one that concerned not only humans but themselves as well. They joined the fight, understanding that they alone were capable of confronting this shadow, for they possessed the necessary physical and psychic resources. Their transformation was no uncontrolled fit of rage. It was a disciplined, energy-intensive process, demanding years of training and control, allowing them to retain their reason and tactical thinking. It was employed for tactical purposes, to breach defenses, for rapid movement, for close quarters combat against superior foes, and to utilize their heightened senses. For the sake of survival, the Lycans transformed their society. From scattered clans, they evolved into a highly organized, militarized structure entirely dedicated to the war against vampires. The hierarchy was strict, based on merit, combat experience, and demonstrated ability for control. Training programs were grueling, encompassing not only physical conditioning and weapons mastery, but also intensive mental exercises to enhance resistance to vampiric psycho-assaults, as well as the development of their own mind defense techniques. Conscription covered everyone capable of bearing arms or possessing essential skills: engineering, medicine, science, logistics. Various units existed, each with specific tasks. Infantry conducted sweeps and controlled territories. Reconnaissance located nests and vampire movement routes. Engineering corps built fortifications and defensive structures. There were also special groups for capturing and studying vampires, the most dangerous and valuable targets. Eradicating all vampires proved impossible. They were too adaptive, too adept at hiding among the human population, too numerous in their peaceful guise to be simply hunted down and eliminated en masse. Containment and study became the only long-term strategy for survival. Thus, the concept of blood farms emerged. Their creation was a difficult, almost unbearable ethical compromise. It meant maintaining living, sentient beings, hostile, yet used as subjects of study. These were not prisons in the conventional sense, but hybrid scientific military complexes, built in the most isolated and fortified locations. The farms fulfilled numerous critical tasks. They served as R&D centers and frontline training bases in this millennial war. Research involved studying vampire physiology on live subjects, their cellular structure, metabolism, regeneration mechanisms, the sources of their power. Lycans sought true weaknesses, developing countermeasures at biochemical and physiological levels. Control meant detaining the most dangerous, unique, and ancient specimens, whose influence, abilities, and historical value were critical to understanding the enemy and its strategy. Development encompassed the creation of new weapons, defensive fields, bioscanners, specialized materials resistant to vampiric strength, and rapid regeneration, all based on the data obtained. Training meant preparing special units and scientific personnel in conditions as close to real threats as possible, using controlled subjects to simulate combat and stress situations. The Lycans' counter-technologies were not based on magic, but on a scientific understanding of vampires and their own abilities, supplemented by centuries of combat experience. Bioscanners detected specific signatures, thermal, energetic, subtle vibrations that vampires emitted at rest and when mimicking. Energy fields developed from research into their own energy fields temporarily suppressed regeneration, weakened physical capabilities, and blocked mental influence. Specialized weaponry included sonic emitters, causing disorientation and physical pain in vampires, electrical dischargers that temporarily paralyzed their nervous system, and chemical compounds specifically affecting their unique biochemistry, slowing regeneration and inducing intoxication. Materials used in defense and equipment were the result of long, costly development. Multi-layered alloys, composites, ceramics. They withstood impacts of incredible force and resisted rapid regeneration, preventing wounds from instantly closing around embedded projectiles, thus buying time for neutralization. The Terrairma complex was situated in a location chosen for its isolation, defensibility, and secrecy. A deep, impenetrable forest, covered with swamps and rocky ridges, stretched for hundreds of miles in all directions. This provided natural isolation, making accidental discovery impossible for both vampires and the remnants of humanity. The terrain, combining steep hills, deep ravines, and rock outcroppings, made penetration of the farm's territory exceedingly difficult and laborious, forcing the use of only a few meticulously controlled approaches. A harsh continental climate with long, snowy winters, when movement through the forest was hampered by deep snow, and humid, difficult-to-traverse summers with an abundance of insects and bogs, served as a natural barrier and wore down any uninvited guest. Secrecy from both races was an absolute priority. Vampires did not know the farm's exact location and scale, and therefore did not plan a massive assault. The few surviving and hiding humans were also unaware of its existence, thus not becoming unwitting sources of information under torture or objects of vampiric manipulation. The architecture of terra firma was the zenith of Lycan defensive engineering, embodying the principle of a fortress within a fortress. It was a multi-layered echeloned structure, sunk deep into the bedrock. The outer perimeter consisted of a wide exclusion zone, cleared of vegetation and packed with thousands of sensors, motion detectors, biosignature scanners, which distinguished Lycan from vampire or other living beings with high accuracy, seismic sensors reacting to anomalous vibrations and hidden traps, snares and camouflaged non-lethal minefields for personnel. The middle perimeter included fortified barriers of multi-layered composite materials and reinforced ceramics, tens of feet high, topped with electrical and energy barriers. Patrol routes ran along these walls, constantly monitored by heavily armed squads, and a network of watchtowers with automated surveillance systems, night vision, thermal imagers, and bioscanners was in place. The inner perimeter, directly surrounding the main structures and entry complexes, was protected by directed energy fields which disoriented, temporarily paralyzed, or caused physical pain to vampires, and numerous overlapping firing positions. A system of airlocks, both at the complex entrance and between internal sectors, was mandatory. Each zone could be instantly sealed and isolated in case of a breach. Most vital systems and a portion of the living quarters were located in deep subterranean sections, carved directly into the rock to minimize the risk of a direct hit. Redundancy of life support, power supply, ventilation, and security systems was absolute. Each system had at least 2 independent backup circuits located in different parts of the complex. The internal layout of the farm was a symbiosis of an advanced scientific laboratory and a highly secure military bunker. Personnel living quarters were ascetic and functional, small rooms, common recreation areas with minimal comfort, mess halls. Everything was subordinated to efficiency, hygiene, and security. Personal space was a luxury. Laboratory complexes were specially protected. Sterile rooms, multi-layered walls, isolated ventilation systems, secure data, and biological sample storage. Armories were under the strictest control, accessible only to authorized personnel with multi-factor identification and biometric verification. The medical bay was equipped with advanced equipment for treating injuries inflicted by vampires, including specialized means to combat infections caused by their blood and claws, and for recovery from psychic attacks. The command center, the brain of the complex, was a fortified room, deeply buried and equipped with an array of screens displaying data from all sensors, surveillance cameras, and life support systems. The containment blocks were the heart and raison d'etre of the farm. The containment blocks were not ordinary prison cells. They were high-tech complexes designed to hold beings of incredible strength, speed, adaptability, and unique abilities. The walls consisted of multi-layered special materials, reinforced composites, energy absorbents, vibration-isolating layers, several feet thick, capable of withstanding colossal impacts and attempts to gnaw or break through them. Each cell was equipped with a personal energy field, configurable to suppress specific subject abilities, regeneration, speed, or mental influence, or for complete physical immobilization. Life support systems supplied a regulated air mixture with reduced oxygen to slow metabolism, controlled temperature and humidity, and could inject potent sedatives, neutralizing agents, or paralytics into the air in case of emergency. Constant video surveillance was conducted from multiple angles, using cameras resistant to electromagnetic and psychophysical interference, their data streams duplicated and encrypted. Sensors tracked the subject's slightest physiological indicators: pulse, respiration, temperature, brain activity, muscle activity. A detailed classification system existed for subjects by number, threat level, unique abilities, historical value. Ancient and particularly dangerous individuals were held in the deepest, most secure blocks, under multiple layers of control, enhanced security, and constant targeting by automated neutralization systems. Terra Firma's personnel consisted almost exclusively of Lycans who had undergone the most rigorous selection and training, their loyalty and stress resistance beyond question. The military contingent was responsible for perimeter security, internal safety, incident response, and subject convoy. The scientific staff included specialists in vampiric biochemistry, genetics, behavior, psychology, energetics, individuals whose knowledge was vital. Their vulnerability required constant protection and isolation from the test subjects. The technical service maintained the operation of all the farm's complex systems, from power supply to containment systems. Their lives were dedicated to service, strict routine, and constant tension. Every day passed under the heavy awareness that beyond the cell walls were not just prisoners, but beings who shattered not only body, but also mind. Beings whose intellect and cunning could not be underestimated. The elite Cerberus squad was the farm's rapid response team, the last line of defense in case of a serious incident within the complex, and for executing particularly dangerous external missions, such as subject capture. The squad leader was Major Sirius Raven. His service record included dozens of successful operations capturing and neutralizing vampires. He was a legend among Lycans. He was pragmatic, unsentimental, possessing a sharp analytical mind that quickly assessed situations and made optimal decisions under pressure. He was a veteran of this war, with immense experience. The scars on his face and hands testified to past clashes and losses. His team was not a random assortment of fighters. It was a cohesive, highly effective collective of specialists, each the best in their field. Sergeant Icarus handled communications and tracking. His senses in transformed state were incredibly acute, allowing him to pick up the faintest signals. Lieutenant Xena was a sniper and observer, capable of detecting even well-camouflaged targets at great distances and delivering precise strikes. Captain Leon was an expert in containment and demolitions, a master of specialized equipment and improvised traps. Dr. Astrid was the attached field medic and biochemist, whose knowledge of vampire physiology was invaluable for first aid and applying specific neutralizing agents. Rex was a specialist in close combat and reconnaissance, whose instincts, physical skills, and knowledge of terrain were top tier. Their relationships were strictly professional on the surface, but deeply trusting and fraternal in essence, built on years of shared dangers where each had covered the other's back. A typical day at terra firma consisted of a series of grueling training exercises, defense breach simulations, drills for psycho attacks and disorientation, patrolling the multi-level perimeter in all weather, escorting scientists to dangerous containment sectors, and checks of all security systems, from the most primitive to the most complex energy fields. Fatigue was a constant companion, seeping into their bones. But a profound dedication to their cause was also present. They knew what they were fighting for. 100th check of Sector C5 today, Rex grumbled, patting his scanner, familiar weariness etched on his face. Sirius nodded, not taking his eyes off the indicators on his wrist-mounted computer. Better the 100th check, Rex, than one mistake we miss. Old systems get tired, Leon observed, inspecting the fastenings of another airlock with an engineer's critical eye. Just like us, Major. As long as they hold, we hold. Xena replied quietly over the internal comms, her voice drifting from an observation post above the corridor. Otherwise, what? Let them out? Tension hung perpetually in the air, a weight on their shoulders. Everyone understood that beyond the walls, beyond the energy fields and feet of specialized materials, were not just prisoners. There resided beings whose nature was destructive, whose desire for freedom was absolute. Their abilities spelled the end of their world. Days at the farm followed one another with monotonous, almost soporific precision. Reveille, training, breakfast in the common mess hall, shifts on posts, system checks, patrols. But recently, subtle, barely perceptible deviations from this iron routine had begun to appear. Minor equipment malfunctions became commonplace. Flickering lights in corridors, erroneous brief readings on secondary sensors, inexplicable noises and interference in internal communication systems emanating from the depths of the complex. All this was attributed to aging systems that had been running non-stop for years, to constant load, to plain human error, and to the psychological fatigue of the personnel. Perception was distorted by stress, isolation, and the constant pressure of proximity to danger. These small anomalies were harbingers, quiet alarm bells. They were overlooked, ignored in the general routine, in the confidence of the reliability of all systems. Subject 37 occupied a special sinister place in the farm's catalog of nightmares. He wasn't just ancient. His age was counted in centuries, lived in the shadows, in times when Lycans were only beginning their struggle. He possessed a unique, particularly dangerous ability that distinguished him from most captured vampires, even ancient ones. His psychophysical influence wasn't mere hypnosis inducing panic or stupor. He distorted electronic signals, subtly affecting the operation of complex systems, causing malfunctions, false alarms, and the ignoring of real data. Moreover, he influenced brain function at a distance, causing not panic but subtle disorientation, muddled thoughts, errors in decision-making, a temporary blinding of consciousness. A person would look directly at a problem and not see it. The story of his capture was legendary among the staff. It had required the coordinated efforts of several elite squads, lasted several days, and resulted in significant Lycan losses. He was valued for research as a unique key to understanding new sophisticated forms of vampiric attack and developing a universal countermeasure against mental influence. He was too valuable. Risking his destruction was out of the question. Subject 37's escape mechanism was not an act of brute force, nor was it accidental. It was the result of a long, methodical, meticulously planned process, in which he exploited subtle system vulnerabilities and errors. Subject 37 didn't just break the door. He broke the perception and logic of those guarding him. His ability to distort signals allowed him to slowly, almost imperceptibly, influence the operation of motion and biosignature sensors in his containment block and adjacent sectors, creating dead zones and false readings. He used his abilities for subtle, prolonged influence on several technicians and guards working with security systems specifically in his block, inducing chronic fatigue, inattentiveness, errors in check procedures, and the dismissal of minor glitches that he himself caused. Thus, he created a feedback loop. The sequence of his actions was calculated to the smallest detail. First, he caused a temporary malfunction in his cell's containment field. He didn't disable it completely to avoid immediate alarm, but merely weakened the field and created a window. Then he seized the moment. A technician, under his influence, made an error while checking an airlock. He left the airlock in a vulnerable state and temporarily deactivated some protective protocols, convinced he was testing. Breaching the airlock with a combination of subtle influence and physical strength, he moved through service corridors and ventilation shafts. He used his abilities to suppress sensors and hid in surveillance blind spots. These zones were known to him thanks to years of observing the farm's routine and schematics he had subconsciously read from the minds of personnel. It was an intelligent, technologically sophisticated solution within the scope of his unique abilities. A cascade of alarms began with a local alert in Subject 37's containment block. Sensors inside the cell finally registered his absence, a critically dangerous situation that could no longer be ignored. Automated protocols triggered instantly. Adjacent sectors locked down. Internal airlocks sealed. Air supply altered. The duty shift began a primary check according to protocol. But almost immediately, a second, far more alarming confirmation arrived: a breach of the outer perimeter. External bioscanners and seismic sensors activated, detecting anomalous movement beyond the exclusion zone. The nature of the movement indicated a vampire moving at high speed. The farm went into full combat readiness. Code Red protocol. The shriek of sirens, sharp and piercing, filled the corridors. Emergency lighting bathed everything in an alarming red glow. The final internal airlocks slammed shut with a clang, isolating sectors from each other, ready for an internal breach. Data streamed into the command center, processed by the central computer. Identification of the escaped subject. No. 37. Experienced officers at the screens instantly grasped the scale of the threat. Subject 37 beyond the perimeter. This was the worst-case scenario. A message to the farm director went out through secure communication channels, and the response was immediate. A frantic analysis began of 37's escape routes, his objectives, and the consequences of his escape. The order to Sirius and his squad came clearly and without superfluous words, with maximum priority. Major Raven, Subject 37 is outside the perimeter. Order, intercept and retrieve. Under all circumstances, alive. Repeat, alive. Do not terminate. The explanation for the importance of capturing him alive followed the order: years of research, unique data on his abilities, a key to understanding other vampires and developing countermeasures. This complicated the task to the extreme, putting the squad's lives at even greater risk. Termination would have been easier, but the Lycan world could not afford to lose such a source of information. The squad's preparation was swift, stark, and instinctive. There was no time for deliberation. Sirius relayed the information, concisely outlining the known data on Subject 37, the specifics of his abilities, and the strict order. They discussed scenarios of his behavior beyond the perimeter, based on his profile, known cases of other subjects' escapes, and the local topography. Task allocation was instinctive, based on knowledge of each squad member's strengths, their combat roles, and a non-verbal understanding of each other. The team geared up quickly. This wasn't just getting weapons. They took the most specialized equipment, modified rifles with ammunition designed to cause maximum trauma before regeneration could take effect, fragmentation and acid rounds, portable containment field emitters, tuned to parameters most effective against 37, ensnaring nets of special materials that could withstand tons of tearing force, latest generation field bioscanners with an extended detection spectrum, deployment, stepping beyond the perimeter. The squad exited the farm's secure internal premises through one of the emergency airlocks set into the rock face itself, opening directly into the forest. They moved quickly but cautiously, scanning the area around the breach point and the perimeter bypass, looking for tracks confirming the vampire's route. Then, crossing the boundary of the sensor-laden exclusion zone. The sterile, lit corridors, metal doors, and hum of life support systems were left behind. They were met by the cold forest air, the scents of damp earth and pine, and a darkness pierced only by the narrow, powerful beams of tactical lights mounted on their helmets and weapons. The sensation of the wild after concrete walls and metal doors was stark, almost shocking. The switch from guard mode to hunt mode was instantaneous, an instinct honed over years. From this moment, they were alone, armed with their experience, advanced technology, and predatory instincts, against one of the most dangerous creatures in the world, on his territory. A territory where he was free, where he knew every ravine and every shadow, and where he could use his entire arsenal of abilities without restriction. the squad delved deeper into the forest, a dense, impenetrable darkness closing in around them, only partially dispelled by the narrow, powerful beams of their helmet-mounted tactical lights. The air was cold and damp, filled with the scents of decaying leaves, pine needles, and moist earth. The tracking began, a complex, multi-layered process combining the Lycans' heightened natural senses with advanced technologies specifically designed for this purpose. Using their enhanced abilities in both human and transformed states, the Lycans picked up the faintest sense, the specific metallic odor of vampire blood, the barely perceptible scent of their skin unlike anything else, the almost intangible trace of their psychophysical field lingering in the air. They heard sounds inaccessible to ordinary humans, the rustle of leaves caused by careless movement at a great distance, the snap of twigs under an alien weight, a change in the forest's usual soundscape, the sudden silence of birds or insects, indicating the approach of a large predator. Their night vision, many times superior to human, allowed them to navigate in near-total darkness, discerning silhouettes and movements. The ability for thermal and bioscanning operating at an instinctual level supplemented visual perception, allowing them to see living beings through obstacles. All this was combined with the portable bioscanners the squad carried, devices that detected temperature anomalies, specific biosignatures characteristic exclusively of vampires, and traces of their energy field that lingered in the environment for some time. Trail tracers, sprayed over the vampire's presumed route, settled on his tissues and were then detected by special instruments, making the trail visible in a specific spectrum. Optical devices with multispectral analysis helped identify traces invisible to the naked eye. For example, altered chemical composition of soil and vegetation. But Subject 37 wasn't just fleeing in panic. He was actively evading pursuit, using his ancient cunning, knowledge of the terrain, and unique abilities. He erased his tracks, moving over rocky sections where no prints were left and along stream beds and shallow rivers, concealing his scent and physical signs. He used the dense forest canopy, moving along lower tree branches or through windfalls to remain unseen from the ground and avoid thermal detection. He deliberately changed direction without apparent logic, using the natural sounds of the forest, the wind, the cries of nocturnal animals, to mask his own movements. The hunt quickly transformed from a mere physical pursuit into an intellectual duel, an exhausting game of cat and mouse, where any participant could become the predator, and where the target constantly changed the rules. The squad soon began to feel they were being watched. It wasn't an overt presence, but an aggregation of barely perceptible signs, inexplicable rustles at the edge of their vision, shadows that vanished the moment they turned their heads, a sense of an alien presence not registered by sensors, the feeling of someone breathing down their necks. The vampire deliberately left false trails and created diversions to test the pursuers' reactions, assess their strength, wear them down, and lead them to a place of his choosing, where he had the advantage. This was the mentality of a predator toying with its prey, confident in its superiority. Then, the signs of psychic influence began. A light, barely conscious pressure on the minds of the fighters, seeping through all their training and mental shields. It manifested not as a direct command or vision, but as subtle changes in their emotional state. Waves of paranoia washed over them. Irrational fears rose from the depths of their subconscious. Doubts about their comrades' actions felt justified. A desire to separate, to hide, arose. Sirius and his team were trained to resist this. Years of training included mental exercises, creating reality anchors, a system of mutual control and support within the squad. A simple question, a code word, physical contact could pull a comrade out from under the growing influence. But 37's influence was stronger than standard, more targeted and pervasive. It demanded maximum concentration and constant internal effort. The squad analyzed the vampire's route. He had chosen this path, through a swamp, then over a steep rocky ridge, not by chance. This terrain gave him clear advantages. It wasn't just an attempt to hide. He was deliberately leading them, preparing a confrontation, and choosing a place for an ambush. Sirius and the team tried to anticipate his next move, based on everything they knew about Subject 37 and his current behavior, analyzing his decisions from the perspective of his psyche and objectives. Every detail of the terrain, every change in his manner of movement was analyzed for tactical meaning, for hidden logic. Tension mounted with every yard conquered in the darkness. The forest ceased to be mere background. It became part of the trap, a vast living organism concealing danger around every bend, behind every tree. The fighters were at the limits of their physical and mental strength. Their senses were heightened to the extreme, every nerve stretched taut. Fatigue was felt in every muscle, in every breath, but the determination to carry out the order, to capture 37 alive, remained unshaken. The first physical contact, its harbinger, occurred suddenly and fleetingly. It wasn't a full-blown clash, but a demonstration of power and proximity. The vampire appeared for a moment at the edge of Rex's vision, a blurred, dark shape against the tree trunks 50 yards away. A second. Then he vanished, leaving behind a swift, distracting blow to a nearby old stump, which exploded into splinters with a loud crack. He left a more obvious, provocative trace, deep, fresh scratches on the bark of a tree 10 feet up, demonstrating his strength and closeness. It was his way of saying, "I'm here, I know you're here, and I'm faster than you." The goal was clear, to undermine confidence, sow fear, show that he knew where they were and would strike at any moment. The squad understood they were very close. The game of cat and mouse was over. Direct confrontation had begun. Subject 37 chose the ambush site with calculated, almost sinister precision. It was not a random patch of forest, but a place where his advantages, speed, strength, ability for stealth and mental influence, were maximized, and the squad's capabilities, firepower, coordination in a broad formation, use of scanners, were neutralized. A narrow ravine, overgrown with dense, thorny bushes, bounded on one side by a steep, almost sheer rock face, and on the other by a marshy area, made rapid maneuvering, deployment, and use of numerical superiority impossible. Numerous fallen trees, moss-covered boulders, and rock debris provided ideal cover for a predator. Visibility was limited to a few meters, and every step required maximum caution. Every rustle made hearts stop. The moment of attack itself was lightning fast, disorienting, and terrifying. The vampire didn't attack head-on in an open fight where he could be gunned down. He used his speed, stealth, and manipulation as a single deadly weapon. First, a wave of powerful psychic influence washed over them. Not panic, but stupor. a momentary paralysis of will. The fighters froze in place, their thoughts jumbled, peripheral vision failing, the sounds of the surrounding world distorting. In this brief, critical moment of disorientation, he struck physically. It was a lightning-fast movement, a blur too quick for the brain to process and react. He attacked the most vulnerable targets, those on the flanks of the narrow formation, those carrying the heaviest equipment, those distracted by a false rustle. The blows of his claws and limbs possessed incredible force and precision, aimed at unprotected areas, joints, the neck. The chaos of close combat erupted in the narrow, confined space of the ravine. The vampire was almost invisible, a blur of motion appearing and disappearing in the undergrowth and behind boulders. Blows landed on armor, on exposed areas. The clang of claws against the composite plates of helmets and chest pieces, the crack of breaking bones, tearing flesh, smashed spines, torn limbs, deep ragged wounds. The vampire killed quickly, brutally, and efficiently, turning men into bloodied wreckage. The squad members reacted. They raised their rifles, trying to catch the elusive target in their sights, but he was too fast, too unpredictable, appearing here, then there, never lingering. Shots went wide, hitting trees, rocks, and earth, sending splinters and stone chips flying. The sound of battle was a horrifying medley of pained screams, curses, the roar of gunfire, ragged breathing, and the low, animalistic snarl of the vampire. The first losses were shocking. It wasn't a heroic fall in battle, but a brutal one-sided slaughter in the dark. Lycans, elite fighters who had undergone inhuman training, fell with horrifying, life-incompatible injuries. Blood soaked the ground, mixing with the damp soil. The terror in the face of an enemy whose speed and strength were supernatural mingled with the grief and rage of the survivors. They watched their comrades die, helpless to do anything. The inability to help the fallen, to pull them from under the blows, was agonizing. Despite the losses, chaos, and mounting mental pressure, the surviving fighters acted on their training. Instincts and years of preparation kicked in even under extreme duress. They covered each other, retreated to more advantageous positions, used the terrain for temporary protection. Coordinated use of specialized weaponry became their only chance for survival and fulfilling the order. One of the squad, understanding the criticality of the situation and the need to briefly even the odds in close combat, decided on a partial, controlled transformation. An incomplete shift, requiring colossal control, but granting the necessary boost in speed, strength, and endurance to confront the vampire face to face. The squad shifted from passive defense to a desperate attempt to immobilize the vampire, per the strict Alive order. They deployed containment measures despite his incredible agility. Captain Leon, despite a wound sustained in the skirmish, deployed a portable net launcher made of special materials, thin but incredibly strong filaments capable of withstanding immense loads. He tried to ensnare the vampire in the confined space of the ravine. Another fighter, Rex, fired a precise shot from a paralyzer, a directed energy pulse designed to temporarily disable the vampire's nervous system, slowing his regeneration. This required incredible teamwork under fire, synchronicity. Sirius distracted the vampire for a split second, taking a blow himself, while Leon deployed the net, and Rex fired the paralyzer. The vampire's desperate struggle against the restraints was terrifying. He tore at the net with unnatural strength, tried to dodge the pulse, his body arching and shuddering, his power seemingly limitless even under the duress of his injuries. Finally, the battered, heavily depleted squad managed to immobilize and secure Subject 37 in the transport container they had brought for such an eventuality. It was made of the same multi-layered materials as the cell walls and equipped with an internal containment field which they managed to activate. His rage was palpable even through the thick, impenetrable walls. A muffled, snarling, guttural thuds, attempts to influence the minds of the fighters standing nearby, even from within the container. Then came the grim, silent assessment of the situation. The casualty count was brief and horrifying. First aid to the wounded treating burns from contact with vampire blood, its composition caused chemical burns, dressing ragged claw wounds, splinting fractures. A heavy, oppressive silence hung in the air after the battle, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the dry, metallic sounds of the container's latches being secured. The price of fulfilling the order was devastating. Cerberus squad was practically annihilated, but the mission was accomplished. The journey back to the farm was grueling, physically and morally. The squad was physically exhausted. Everyone bore wounds of varying severity, dull aches in overstrained muscles, bruises, abrasions, fatigue from continuous tension, and the horror they had endured. Emotionally, they were devastated. The loss of comrades who had fought shoulder to shoulder for years was a heavy, irreplaceable blow, leaving a gaping void in their souls. They carried the heavy transport container with Subject 37. Its weight felt not only physically, but also as an immense burden of responsibility and a reminder of the terrible price of his capture. The pain of loss mingled with the bitter relief of a completed task. But this relief was poisoned by the awareness of the tragedy's scale. Their pace was slow, each step laborious over the rugged terrain, especially with the cumbersome and heavy container, which had to be carried by 2 or 3, taking turns. At a certain point, having distanced themselves several miles from the battle site and reached more open terrain, Sirius began attempts to contact the farm by radio. The first few attempts were written off as interference from the complex terrain, dense forest, or weather conditions. After all, they were deep in the wilderness. But when communication consistently failed, despite using different frequencies and all available channels, standard, emergency, encrypted unease turned into a distinct cold dread. This wasn't just interference or a technical glitch. The radio silence was total, dead. There was nothing on the airwaves, no expected signals, no regular reports that were broadcast around the clock. The squad tried to pick up any signals from the farm that might break through the interference. Automated radio beacons that operated constantly, transmitting the complex's status. Standard patrol checkpoints that radioed in at scheduled times. Even the usual background radio traffic between units within the complex, which was always present. Nothing. Complete dead silence on airwaves that were always active, constantly transmitting summaries, commands, system status reports. This was a clear red flag, a signal of critical danger, that something had gone catastrophically wrong. Sirius instinctively, based on his vast experience, knew what had happened. Something serious, something that had disabled all of the farm's communication systems. Realizing the danger, not only to the farm but to themselves, as no communication meant no one was expecting their return, or that there was nowhere to return to, Sirius immediately changed tactics. The squad shifted from marching order to stealthy movement and reconnaissance. The pace slowed further, each step becoming maximally cautious and calculated. The watch was intensified. Point, rear, and flank scouts moved at a distance, scanning the surrounding territory. Everyone was on maximum alert, weapons ready, scanners active for any anomalies. The container with Subject 37 became an even greater burden, slowing them and making them more conspicuous to anyone who might be tracking them, but abandoning it was impossible. It was their mission, and the mission's objective was inside. As they neared the farm, the absence of usual signs of activity became increasingly unnerving, almost surreal. There were no lights in the perimeter watchtowers, which usually burned all night. The characteristic low hum of the deep underground generators, always palpable in the air on approach, was absent. No flashing lights or silhouettes of patrols, which constantly moved along the perimeter and exclusion zone. The feeling of abandonment, of something fundamentally wrong, a dead silence where there should have been the hum of life, grew with every step, pressing on their psyche more heavily than a vampiric psycho attack. The farm, always alive, active, buzzing with hidden energy and tension, was now dead, silent. The first visual confirmation of the horror came when they reached the outer perimeter. The first line of defense, considered almost impenetrable. The defensive fence or wall wasn't merely bypassed or climbed. It was literally destroyed, as if by a gigantic force. Huge breaches gaped in several places in the barriers, jagged, torn, as if ripped out from within. Watchtowers were demolished or toppled, their structures and equipment strewn on the ground, mangled. There was no guard on duty at the main gates. The gates themselves were twisted or wide open, leading into a gaping darkness. The scale of destruction was shocking, exceeding all expectations. This wasn't an attack from outside by vampire forces, though that remained a possibility. Only those who had broken out from within, possessing their strength and fury, or those on their side, could have acted this way. Cautious penetration of the farm's territory occurred through one of the breaches in the perimeter. The squad meticulously examined every yard of ravaged ground. The silence inside the perimeter was even deeper and more oppressive than in the forest or outside. The air was heavy with the smell of burning, blood, destruction, and something else. Something vampiric. The first scattered bodies of Lycans' perimeter guards lay at their posts. Traces of intense, short, and brutal fighting were everywhere. Smashed equipment, scattered ammunition, claw marks on metal and concrete. The squad realized this was no drill, no false alarm. This was a catastrophe. The fortress, once considered impregnable, the heart of their containment system, had fallen. The first steps inside the ruins of the Terrairma complex were steps into a waking nightmare. The squad advanced cautiously, weapons ready, scanning every corner, every dark doorway. But the scene unfolding before them was one of universal slaughter and total devastation. Destroyed guard posts, corridors littered with concrete debris, twisted metal, and signs of desperate brief struggles. The bodies of Lycans from various units, guards, technical staff, even scientists, lay where death had overtaken them. Some were exsanguinated to the last drop, their bodies emaciated and desiccated, mere husks. Others were torn apart with horrifying brutality, their armor crumpled like paper, bones broken in unnatural ways. There were clear signs not only of physical violence but also of panic, disorientation caused by a powerful psycho attack. Bodies frozen in strange poses, faces contorted in terror, evidence of shots fired into walls or even at their own, induced by hallucinations or loss of control. These were clear, undeniable traces of the presence and actions of vampires, not just one, but many. The destroyed laboratory blocks were a spectacle of scientific apocalypse. Equipment was smashed to smithereens, research instruments blown apart, computers and servers holding priceless data were crushed or shattered as if by sledgehammers. Reagents and biological samples, containing years of research and even potential vampire weaknesses, were spilled across the floor, mingling with blood and debris. Research data, accumulated over years at the cost of incredible effort and lives, was irretrievably lost. There were signs of a hasty evacuation, attempts to save something which had obviously failed. Or it was deliberate destruction by the attackers, vampires seeking to destroy data on their weaknesses to preserve their secrets. Valuable data was compromised, a catastrophic loss. Then they reached the most dreadful place, the central containment blocks, located in the deepest part of the complex. Here, the scale of the catastrophe was most evident and horrifying. Cell doors, designed to withstand explosions, made of multi-layered composites and equipped with energy fields, were ripped from their hinges, twisted, crumpled, or, in some cases, melted from the inside. Protective fields were disabled or destroyed, their emitters hanging as mangled pieces of metal. Empty cells. Dozens of cells designed to hold the most dangerous, unique, and ancient subjects, each representing a separate, meticulously studied threat, were now empty. Ancient, unique, particularly dangerous vampires. Those the Lycans had captured and studied for centuries, whose abilities were known only to the farm's specialists, were now free. The catalogue of horrors had been unleashed. The fate of the personnel became clear with every step deeper into the complex. No survivors were found. The search for the bodies of scientists, technicians, administrative staff, and medical personnel only confirmed this terrible assumption. Scenes of horror. Some had died trying to barricade office or laboratory doors with furniture, attempting to buy seconds for themselves or others. Some had been captured, but vampires rarely took prisoners, except for feeding or sadistic torture, and even these prisoners did not survive long. Their bodies found later, exsanguinated or mutilated. The understanding that there were virtually no survivors inside the farm, that the entire staff, all the scientific personnel, all the guards had perished, was a heavy, crushing realization. Sirius and his team, using their experience, sharp analytical minds, and knowledge of the farm's structure, quickly understood what had happened. How had the vampires managed to break out from within, bypassing so many layers of defense, airlocks, fields, feet of walls? Was it a coordinated riot of all prisoners, or did the unique ability of one of the subjects, perhaps 37 himself who had escaped outside, or someone else who remained inside, whose ability was unknown or underestimated, play a key role? Was it betrayal? Had someone among the personnel been manipulated to such an extent as to open critical doors, disable systems, or sabotage defenses? They searched for clues amidst the destruction. What remained untouched? Where was the epicenter of the destruction, indicating the breach point or the main struggle? The answers were scattered among the debris, bodies, and twisted metal. The realization of the full scale of the catastrophe pressed down with physical force, inducing nausea. It wasn't just the farm that had fallen. A fortress had fallen, a symbol of containment, a center for gathering critical data. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of highly dangerous vampires with unique abilities, about whom the Lycans had gathered information for years at the cost of thousands of lives, had been freed. This information, critically important for fighting them, was lost forever. The vampires now knew the farm's weak points, its structure, its security protocols. The complex built for their containment had become their base, their new nest, from which they began to coordinate their actions. This was not just a tactical failure. It was a blow to the entire containment system, to the very foundation of the Lycan's survival strategy. The agonizing decision was inevitable, despite the instinctive desire for revenge or to try to save someone. The squad had neither the strength, nor the ammunition, nor the numerical superiority to clear the vampire-infested farm of the dozens or hundreds of creatures inside. To remain meant certain death or capture, which would be even worse. The only chance was to escape this hell, return to the forest, try to establish contact with command, and report the catastrophe while the information still had meaning, and could be used to prepare the rest of Lycan society for a new, far more terrible phase of the war. They had to leave, carrying the knowledge of this horror, so that the sacrifices at the farm would not be in vain. The squad departed the ruined farm, exiting through the same breach in the perimeter they had entered. The sensation of having escaped the belly of a monster was sharp, unpleasant, and oppressive. Now, they were not just in a dangerous wild forest that could itself be lethal. They had become targets. Targets for all those creatures the farm had held within its depths, who were now free. Their ancient predatory instincts sharpened after years of confinement. The feeling of vulnerability, the sense of having become prey in a vast hunting ground, was almost physical. A cold touch on the skin. Barely had they ventured a few hundred yards into the forest from the farm's shattered perimeter when the squad began to sense they were being pursued. It wasn't the focused, targeted presence of Subject 37 as before. It felt like many eyes in the darkness, many hidden movements all around. The sound of branches where no one was visible, a barely perceptible shift in the air, rustlings that didn't sound like wild nature. The absence of normal forest sounds, birdsong or the cries of nocturnal animals, indicated the presence of large predators, forcing ordinary wildlife into hiding. It became clear that the freed vampires had not scattered individually. They were using the forest as their territory, knowing it perfectly, and now they were hunting together. Pack tactics manifested quickly and effectively. The vampires acted not as individuals, but as a coordinated group, demonstrating a chilling semblance of tactical thinking or instinctive cooperation. The squad felt pressure from different sides, gradually tightening the circle. These were beaters, flushing them in a specific direction, and ambushers waiting ahead in advantageous positions in ravines, behind rocky ridges among dense thickets. Vampires of different types worked together, using their unique abilities. One would distract or disorient with a powerful psycho attack, while others attacked from the flanks or rear with incredible speed. This was a more complex, more lethal, and more exhausting pursuit than hunting the lone, albeit dangerous. Subject 37. The squad began to take losses again, but now under different conditions. Not in an open, though unequal battle, but during an exhausting flight. Someone, lagging for a second to bandage a wound or adjust gear, would simply vanish without a trace, dragged into the darkness so quickly and silently that the others couldn't react, hearing only a short scream or a choked groan. Someone would fall into a sudden ambush, stumbling right upon a vampire hidden in bushes or behind a rock, their fate decided in an instant. The psychic influence intensified, now emanating from multiple minds. The vampires used it not only for disorientation but also to isolate victims, sow panic, create distrust within the group, force them to make a mistake, separate from the group, and become easy prey. The dwindling squad fought not only physical exhaustion and pain, but also mounting panic and despair, trying to maintain formation, coordination, and focus on the task, to survive and transmit information. The surviving Lycans used all their wilderness survival skills, enhanced by instincts and years of military training. They moved as stealthily as possible, using shadows, terrain features, and natural sounds to mask their movement. They camouflaged temporary shelters when they had to make short stops for rest or to aid the wounded. They used natural terrain, rock outcroppings, narrow passages, dense thickets as temporary protection, trying to throw off the trail, albeit with limited success against such effective pursuers, whose senses and knowledge of the territory were perfect. Every step, every action was a desperate struggle for survival. Every moment could be their last. Desperate attempts at communication continued. Sirius, or the surviving comms specialist, constantly tried to establish contact with the outside world, with the nearest Lycan outposts or command. The portable transmitter's battery was draining faster, possibly from damage sustained in combat, intensive use, or even vampiric influence on electronics. Each attempt to send a signal was a last chance, a thin ray of hope in a hopeless situation. It was crucial to transmit not just a distress signal, but specific data. What happened to the farm? Who escaped? Their current position? The approximate number of pursuers? Realizing that fleeing endlessly, evading multiple pursuers was impossible, that they would be gradually picked off one by one, Sirius made a difficult but the only possible decision: to find the most defensible position. A place where they could hold a defense against superior forces at least until dawn or the arrival of help, if the signal had gotten through. A rocky outcrop with a narrow approach, the ruins of an old stone building, a dense thicket with a good view of approaches and a limited number of attack directions. They found such a place. A small rocky hill sparsely covered with sturdy trees with a single narrow stony ascent path and a good view of the surrounding lowlands. The remaining squad members, their numbers terrifyingly reduced, prepared for defense, distributing scarce ammunition and specialized equipment, setting up firing positions among rocks and trees, psychologically preparing for a final stand. This was to be their last bastion. The vampires' assault on their chosen position, the rocky hill, began as complete darkness enveloped the forest in a thick black shroud. It wasn't a single massive wave where they could gun down the enemy on approach. It was a series of coordinated assaults designed to wear down the defenders, exhaust their ammunition, and find weaknesses in their improvised defense. The vampires used the darkness, the terrain, their unique abilities, incredible speed, strength, capacity for psycho attack, to strike from unexpected directions. They probed the defenses from various sides simultaneously, making swift, lightning-fast lunges at one flank, retreating, changing the direction of attack, creating constant tension. The battle for survival was desperate, brutal, and bloody. The surviving fighters used everything they had left. The last specialized rounds designed for maximum damage before vampire regeneration could take effect. A few hand grenades, used to create temporary kill zones, cut off groups of vampires, or cover a necessary change of position. The most effective use of the environment, rocks as reliable cover, trees as natural barriers, the narrow passage as a bottleneck. Close combat with vampires when they broke through the improvised defenses was furious and desperate, rifle butts, knives, claws against claws. Even wounded, bleeding Lycans continued to fight, using any available weapon or just their fists and claws, not surrendering. One of the remaining Lycans, understanding the critical moment and the need to buy time and deliver a decisive blow, used a controlled transformation, shifting into his battle form to make a final powerful stand, knowing it might be the last time he assumed that shape. The vampire's psychic influence was a constant, powerful backdrop to the fight. It intensified, filling the air with fear, inducing despair, trying to break the Lycan's will, to make them attack each other, fall into a stupor, or simply surrender to superior force. The fighters waged an internal battle against this influence, relying on training, internal anchors, and their connection to each other. A brief word of support, a look, physical contact could break the mental trap, pulling a comrade from the abyss of terror. The fall of comrades was a horrifying reality of every moment of the battle. Each fallen fighter was not only a loss of firepower in the dwindling group, but also a devastating psychological blow to the survivors, a reminder of their own mortality and the hopelessness of the situation. Their deaths were horrific, demonstrating the full brutality and efficiency of the vampires in attack. The group grew smaller, the defensive circle shrinking to a tiny patch on the hilltop. Ammunition dwindled. At the climax of the battle, when their strength was utterly failing and the vampires were about to breach the final line of defense, when all seemed lost, Sirius, covered by the remnants of his squad, made one last desperate transmission. Through the roar of battle, the sounds of their own struggle, and the escalating psychic assault of the vampires raging around them, he activated the portable transmitter. A short, coded message, containing the most vital information, spoken in a broken voice but with iron will. Terrairma has fallen. Escaped subjects, many, pursuing. Our position, providing the most precise coordinates possible. Requesting emergency evac. Urgent. The signal went out into the ether, a thin thread of hope piercing the night. Through the din of battle, the sounds of their own struggle, the screams of dying comrades, and the escalating psychic inferno of the vampires raging around them, the fighters began to hear distant yet rapidly approaching sounds. A low, powerful thrum of rotors, characteristic of Lycan heavy gunships. Massive, armored machines capable of carrying troops and heavy weaponry. At first it seemed like part of the vampires' psycho attack, an illusion born of desperation and the will to be saved. But the sounds grew clearer, louder, transforming from a whisper to a roar. Above the forest canopy, a couple of miles distant, bright lights appeared. Landing lights, powerful searchlights cutting through the darkness like lasers. The heavy silhouettes of the aircraft were rapidly approaching their position. It was no illusion. It was reinforcements. It was salvation. The arrival of the evacuation force changed the course of the battle instantly and drastically. Heavy gunships, bearing Lycan insignia, moved into position, hovering over the rocky hill, their powerful searchlights flooding the clearing around, exposing the attacking vampires. Ramp doors slammed open with a crash. From the bellies of the massive machines, fresh, fully equipped Lycan squads deployed, instantly taking up positions among the survivors and opening a withering fusillade from automatic weapons and specialized rifles. Air support began suppressing the attacking vampires. Heavy-caliber machine guns mounted on the gunship's sides, and specialized aerial cannons designed to neutralize fast-moving, regenerating targets. The balance of power shifted dramatically. The vampires, accustomed to an advantage in darkness, stealth, and close combat, found themselves under crossfire from air and ground, facing a new, full-strength enemy. In the chaotic conditions of the ongoing battle, under the cover of withering fire from the fresh troops securing the perimeter around the landing zone, the evacuation of Sirius's surviving squad members began. The evac team moved quickly, professionally, under the covering fire of their comrades, ignoring the danger. There was a dash to the landing zone, exhausted, wounded Lycans supporting each other, stumbling, hurried towards the open ramps of the gunships. Aid was administered to the wounded on the move, and they were quickly loaded aboard, laid directly on the cargo bay floor. Sirius, despite his own wounds and exhaustion, supervised the process, ensuring everyone salvageable was aboard, that no one was left behind in the bloody melee. The container with Subject 37, heavy and cumbersome, was also dragged aboard by the efforts of several fighters. The mission, after all, was complete. Aboard the transport, ascending above the forest, there was a stark, almost shocking contrast with the horror left below. Relative safety, the roar of engines, the sensation of upward movement, away from the blood-soaked ground. The exhausted, wounded survivors sat or lay on the cargo bay floor, their breathing ragged and shallow. Fatigue, shock, grief, and disbelief were etched on their faces. The contrast between the hell of the battle remaining below, among the trees and rocks, and the hum of the engines, the sensation of flight, the warm air inside the helicopter, was almost surreal. Blood, dirt, torn armor, ripped clothing. They bore the marks of what they had endured, both physical and unseen. The helicopter gained altitude and turning flew over the Terrairma territory, making a pass before setting course for base. Sirius, leaning against a porthole, looked down at what remained of their fortress. A panorama of devastation unfolded before his eyes in the light of searchlights and fires starting on the grounds. Burning ruins, destroyed structures, gaping holes where meters of defensive walls and barriers had once stood. In the light of the fires raging across the complex, and in the beams of aerial illumination from the gunships, moving silhouettes of vampires were still visible, roaming the territory of the fallen fortress like masters. It was a symbol of defeat, visible, undeniable proof of what had happened. The Lycans' most secure fortress had fallen. The blood farm, built to control them, had fallen, becoming their base, their new nest. And now Sirius's squad, or what was left of it, carried this terrifying news to the rest of the Lycan world. a world that had to prepare for a new, terrible war.